My name is Leah Plath. I'm married to Kyle Plath, and we have a 20-year-old daughter who is actually studying abroad in Peru. Her name is Leah. Cade, who is 18 and is going to Colorado State next year. And Bella, who is a sophomore at Chan High School, and Amaya, who is an 8th grader at Chaska Middle School West. In our house, we've always sort of liked chaos, which kind of sounds silly.
Mealtimes at our house are very funny. Everyone's eating at different times. Everyone's eating different foods. It's always a mystery if the little ones will have to eat PB&Js or they'll have to try the food that my mom made for them.
I'm used to a lot of activity in the house, and I came from a really busy household. And Kyle didn't come from a busy household, but he's kind of a yes guy, so he's willing and adventurous, and so he's willing to go with the flow. The idea of having a lot of people around was sort of normal for me at my house. As we started to have our own family and kind of creating that same kind of open door sort of feel, seeds were planted all along the way of foster care, and we knew that we wanted to have our own kids be a little bit older before we started it. So we never really thought that for sure we're going to do foster care, but we're like, well, we'd be open to it. And so when Dahlia went to college, it was a really tough transition. To have one leave the nest was like, I said to her, I was walking down the hallway one day in our upstairs bedroom area, and I said, every time I pass your room, I'm going to cry. I'm going to cry because you're not going to be here.
We were walking down the hallway where my room was. My mom looks into my room and starts like crying, tearing up. And she was like, I don't like thinking about leaving or walking by this room and having it be empty every day. And at this point, I knew that my parents had been thinking about doing foster care, and I thought that it was something super cool. I didn't know a ton about it, but I just remember the first thing that came to my mind was, well, fill my room with kids. Fill it with kids.
And it was a little bit of a light bulb, like, wow, we actually could do that. I kind of brought it to Kyle, and he was like, okay, we have a lot of babysitters that are willing in the house, and so we sort of talked to everybody in the house about it, like, what would you think about that? We ended up going through Carver County, and there's a lot of paperwork. You have to do a lot of training and a lot of paperwork. It took us probably 6 months to go through the process. You have to go through a full home study. It was kind of long, but it was a really good process to go through, and it was helpful for Kyle and I to be on the same page and understanding where he came from, where I came from, and how do we mesh that together so that we can be not about ourselves, but what the kids need. By the time we had made the decision that we were willing to take kids, we were like, what, 6 months, 9 months, what? Like, we'll take them now, you know? So in our head, we had all decided that we would do that, and then it took longer than that. I would say that our faith was a big driver in doing this. If it's not for us, it's not for us, but we know we're not gonna harm anybody. You know, we know it's not gonna be a hurtful thing for the kids that are in our world and the families. So we just did it. Some of the surprises of where God showed up are in some of the fears that we had. You know, we as a family, one of our biggest concerns in the beginning was safety. So addiction is a really big issue within most of social services. And so, you know, with that just came some safety concerns for our family. And so a lot of things in the beginning were, are we going to be safe? Is this okay? You know, are they going to know where we live? How is this all going to work? And so that being a concern, which is really based out of fear, and how many times does it say in the Bible, do not fear, right? So Kyle and I would look at each other and something would pop up and we're like, do not fear, right? Like questioning it, like, right? We're not supposed to fear, right? And it was really like we were going, do we say yes or do we not? The most beautiful thing is we sort of I maybe feared a relationship with the parents of these people, not really knowing where they were at. And one of our favorite parts about fostering is the relationship that we'd had with the parents. That space of like having fear be one of our concerns and having God just wrap around that fear and saying, no, not only am I gonna help you with the fear, but I'm going to make it one of your favorite parts of this experience. Like, how beautiful is that?
One of the stories that I have of God working through us as a foster family is the story of a girl who came into our house, and given the circumstances that she had been through, just was afraid of guys in general. So coming into our house and being with us and just starting off from being absolutely afraid to after weeks and months being more and more comfortable around Cade and around me, in our house was just one of the ways that God was working through us.
We got a phone call, and it was, I don't know, 5 o'clock, and they had asked if we could meet a mom in a parking lot at 7 o'clock with a social worker because her kids needed to come into care. Okay, we'll come. So we rallied some car seats together and figured out, the ages of the kids and what were the few things that we would need right away, right when they came. Before the mom got there, the social worker and Kyle and I were talking about the story. We're both crying. All of us were crying. So all 3 of us were crying in that space. It's just tough, And so the mom pulls up, and she's a mess, and she's crying, and we had already been crying. So she walks up, and the first thing we did is we just gave her a hug, and we said, we'll take really good care of your kids, and it was just so emotional, but at the same time, it was healing that needed to happen. She needed that time in that space. That was kind of probably not her choice, but to heal for herself. And to be there, it wasn't scary at all for us, to do that, but we kind of were scared to do it, but it was a lot of emotions. But to be able to be with a social worker, too, that after 26 years or however long she had been doing that, she was still able to cry with all of us. It was a pretty tough time to be in, but again, God showed up so big, and that time has now come back as almost to be the foundation of our relationship with that mom, and we have a great relationship with her, and she's a great person, and she's working on her stuff, and she loves her kids, and so being able to start that relationship out in that way with all of us kind of being raw and being, starting it out with grace and love was so helpful for what has been built and so helpful for the kids. One of the kids that was at our house, and she came to us very flat affect. So she was just afraid of showing any emotion. And so she had been with us a couple weeks, and bedtime is just really hard but really magical with these kids because you create this really safe space, and then things start to come. So they really start to talk, and their real emotions start to come out. And so one night, Bella and I were putting the kids to bed, and so we had 2 kids, and they were in the same room at the same time, and so it kind of takes 2 people to do that, and so thankfully our kids are willing to step up for that because it's hard to do it alone. And so we were both putting them to bed, and this little girl started to cry, and she was crying quietly, and she really hadn't done that up until this point, and she was 3. So she started to cry, and I just kind of held her, and I said, it's okay to cry. It's all right to feel those feelings. It's okay. You can miss your mom. And so she cried harder, and she cried louder, and pretty soon she started screaming, crying, and it was so sad. And Bella's looking at me, and she's crying, and I'm crying, and we're holding this little girl, and we're just crying. And we just kept on saying, it's okay. It's okay to cry. If you want to cry really hard, it's okay to cry really hard. And she let out so much emotion in this time, in this space, and Bella and I left, and we're both just bawling, and we looked at each other, and we were like, oh my gosh, what just happened? But it was no doubt that in that really yuck space, God was so present in healing of that.
Fostering is an extension of my faith because it reminds me that people have more going on than what they show, because these kids are so happy and loving and laughing all the time, but they have so much going on behind the scenes. This can kind of transfer to life or high school because it just reminds you to show love to everyone because you don't know what they might have going on in their life.
It was just awful, but really honoring to be able to be that person that they get to cry into. So those are the spaces where God shows up in ways that just feel so surprising. When we're in the thick of it, I don't want to do this again. No. If the calling means that we're called to do this, which in a lot of ways I know that we are, but I'm not saying yes to this again next. No way. I am so excited to go to Peru and not even think about this anymore. I wouldn't say that we could do this for 50 years. I look at people who do this for 50 years and I say, oh my gosh, you cannot do this without God's help for 50 years. There was one time where I was like, I was spent. Like I had nothing left because we actually had a family that came back to us, and we couldn't say no because these kids had never been in care before, and we loved them, loved them. And so when we got the call that they came back into care, our whole entire family I texted them everywhere, and everybody was bawling. Like, it was so sad to know that these guys had to come back in care, because we never thought about that. We never thought about them coming back. And so we had said, well, they have to come to us. There's no other option but them to come to us. And so we'll help them, transition them to the next, wherever they're going to go, whether it be another foster family or whatever is going to happen. We'll transition them, but it can't be very long because we already had a placement. So during this time, I had nothing left. I was fried. And so the kids had come home, and I don't know, they had said something, and I just snapped at them in a way that was just like ridiculous for whatever they had asked. It didn't make sense. And so I found this meme, and it was like when your mom snaps at you about something, and it's this dog that does this like, look. It's super, super funny. So in my isolation, I would do like weird snapping at my kids for things that didn't matter. We were thinking, how can we go out into this world and love people better? Riding that line of, okay, I'm outside of my comfort zone, but yet still in your wheelhouse. Just go do it. Just go love people and forget the judgments. Forget the, do I have what it takes? Just go do it. And if you mess up, you mess up, and just jump in. Be curious, ask questions. You don't have to take a big step. It can be, just tell me more. It's a pretty interesting system, and it's a system that needs more people to be interested in it, and curiosity takes you a lot of places.